So I just finished my walk, which has become a little bit of a daily routine for me. Like many of us, my routine is changed a lot. It's a little bit slower paced. I'm spending a lot more time at home and with the family, and I know for many of us that's true, but for some of us it's not. Especially those who are medical professionals and first responders. I just want to say thank you for the time and effort and money you've invested in honing your craft so that you could be ready for a time like this. And I just want you to know we see you. We're with you. We're staying at home so we can beat this thing as quickly as possible. Hang in there. Like I was saying, our routines have changed. Mine's changed. I'm taking walks more frequently than I used to. And it's sort of interesting to think about routines. How's yours going? Because the truth is, the habits that you and I practice today will shape the people that we become tomorrow. And as I'm thinking about the person, like really, as I'm thinking about the habits today that will create the person of tomorrow, I know exactly where it's going for me. I'm eating a lot of potato chips and gummy bears, so it's gonna be like West plus the quarantine 15. You know what I mean? Like the 15 pounds that you and I will be carrying out when this thing is all over, like all the right stuff in all the wrong places. You know what I mean? Like that is exactly who I am becoming. Well, more important than thinking about those habits, I think, is the motivations behind them. Like the truth is, I feel a little trapped. And so snacking on food that is not good for me but tastes really good is a way to escape, right? It's so important to consider what is driving us, because our beliefs drive our motivations, which drive our habits, which shape who we are becoming. In this season, I've become really grateful for the story of some ancient slaves. There's this group of people that were enslaved in Egypt for about 400 years, doing really hard manual labor. And one day, with the help of a leader named Moses, and it says by the empowerment of God in the story, they escape slavery, and which is a good thing until they find out that they'd be, wandering through the desert. It's essentially where modern day Israel is, and where modern day Egypt is. They had to walk that distance as a people group. And if you're unfamiliar with that terrain, it's very arid. It's a desert. It's not fertile. There's not like farmland or a lot of animals living there. Food and water are both far and in between. So God had to provide for his people. And there's this one story in Exodus 16 that I absolutely love. It's a story of God feeding his people. It said every morning there would be this substance they called manna. We don't really know exactly what it's like, but some sort of like soft bread type thing. And basically it would show up new every morning and it would disappear during the night. And so the people would eat this, and it says they would be satisfied. And God's direction to them through Moses was sort of, hey, eat as much as you need. Take what you need. Feed your family. You'll be full. You'll have everything. You'll be totally provided for. But don't save anything. Like, don't try to put anything in a jar and save it for later. Which of course is exactly what they do, right? Like, of course, you have to have some conflict in a good story. And so these people try to put it in jars and save it for the next day. And what they find is that after an overnight, like it starts to rot, and that there's like worms and maggots in it the next morning. And so they have to throw it away. But the interesting thing in the story is that Moses gets angry. And like, if I was Moses, I have to imagine, like, I wouldn't be so angry as much as I would be laughing, like, because that's funny. Like, you now have to deal with like mold, like a rotting piece of bread, right? Like, you're a moron. The instructions were clear. Now go take care of it, right? Like, take it outside the camp. But I don't think Moses was angry so much for physical reasons as spiritual reasons. Let me tell you why. See, the Israelite people, this nation that had escaped slavery, Their entire way of thinking, their way of living, their way of doing life was totally determined by being a slave. Now, you're talking about the fourth or fifth generation of slaves that we are dealing with here. And so God is putting them in this position to trust him with everything. Why? because God cares a lot more about their physical bodies being rescued from slavery. God wants to bring their entire being out of slavery. And so by forcing them to trust him to provide, they're forging a new way of thinking about God and about living. Like, really, no one blames a former slave for trying to hoard food. Like, that would have been totally normal and natural. I think Moses was angry because his heart was broken for the condition of those people's spirits. Paul talks about this. This is definitely a human pattern, right? Not necessarily, maybe slavery, not necessarily like physical slavery, but like Paul talks about in Romans 7. He's an early Christian thinker. He said that he talks a lot about like the mindset of slavery, like being enslaved to a certain way of thinking, right? Whether it's doing right or doing wrong, or and he goes on for almost that entire chapter. It's really well written. And I have, when I think about myself, I have to believe that I'm a slave to my own ambition. I feel trapped because I'm not accomplishing things like I normally would. I'm not climbing a ladder. And so that feeling of entrapment motivates me to start escaping, in my case with gummy bears and potato chips and takeout, right? Not that there's necessarily anything wrong with any of those things in and of themselves. The irony in that, though, is that I'm jumping from one form of slavery to another. I'm jumping from the slavery of who I am, or the slavery of not accomplishing enough and like feeling like I have to prove myself and be enough when God already said you're enough, to the slavery of like sensational living. I think this is why God gave that nation the 10 Commandments, right? God didn't give them that as a penal code. It wasn't a hard right and wrong because God wanted them to be moral, good little boys and girls. It was a set of rehabilitory practices for them, that they would worship one God, that they wouldn't try to jump to another God that would just end up enslaving them again, that they would take a day off, that people who had been totally marginalized and objectified would find value in being image bearers of God rather than what they produced, right? That they would abstain from sex outside of marriage. Why? Not because God's a killjoy, but because he wanted his community to be a place where love and unity could flourish. He gives these rules, this way of living, this pattern of life to this group of slaves because he loves them and he wants what's best for them. So let me ask you a little bit of an uncomfortable question, if I may. Who are you becoming?